You really have to understand and know your rights, and you have to learn a lot about how the system works. It's challenging to put a conversation like the circus arts industry into a space of, of labor rights, of workers' rights, of unionizing rights, of legislation and of policy. These are conversations that we're most oftentimes left out of. I want this industry to not be afraid of politics. And if you don't do politics, politics will do you.
Welcome to the StageLync podcast, your access and connection to the live performing arts. In this podcast, you'll hear from some of the industry's most inspiring people from around the globe who create magic on stage and backstage. Our guests share their knowledge, passion, and the real stories of how a show comes together. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the StageLync podcast, your connection to the performing arts. You can learn more about us on Instagram at StageLync, StageLync. My name is Kat Landry, and today we are talking with Shenea Stiletto. Shenea Stiletto is a contributor to StageLync.com, host of the Circuspreneur Podcast, a circus worker, and a circus arts industry advocate. She recently partnered with the White House Office of Public Engagement to conduct the first of its kind circus arts industry listening session hosted by the Department of Labor. The White House listening session focused on labor and circus workers' rights, circus arts recognition by the National Endowment for the Arts with a defined individual category, and health and safety. Shenea's continued goal, along with the Circus Arts Guild of America, is to have circus arts industry policy and legislation signed into law on federal and state levels across the U.S. You can support the Circus Arts Guild of America's Change.org petition for circus arts recognition in the U.S. by going to change.org/circusartsrecognition and signing and sharing the petition. Shenea, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kat. I'm so happy to be here. I'm thrilled.
We're so glad to have you on. Now, Shenea, you have been hard at work making waves in the circus industry, promoting fair labor practices, wellness, health and safety. But before we discuss all of that, I want to take us all the way back to where it all began. Can you share with us a little bit about yourself and your story and what brought you to this point?
Yes, I can. That's a great question. That's a great, I think, way to start off the podcast, Kat. And I'm usually the one interviewing, so it's really, it's fun to be on the other side of that and to be interviewed. It's a different space to be in. But I started out in this industry, quite a while ago. I won't say how long. That will age me out. As a circus performer, and then I've evolved over the last several years, and I would say most specifically the last few years. Most of my advocacy work has been informed of the fact that I'm a survivor of UC gymnastics. I came from a gymnastics background, like a lot of circus workers do. I was an acrobatic gymnast before I transitioned into the circus and was recruited by Cirque du Soleil when I was quite young. And I've been really, really fortunate. But as a survivor of UC gymnastics, I learned a lot about how Washington, D.C. functions and works. And I learned a lot about, policy and legislation and what it's like to speak about environments that makes folks kind of very uncomfortable. Speaking about child abuse, for example, is, not usually a topic that people want to engage in. And when you speak about the circus arts, for example, in a lot of very political spaces, you find yourself mostly on the outskirts, and you're coming to them with a topic or a conversation that they've most often not really engaged in before and don't know very much about. So I think that the experience of almost a decade of working on policy and legislation, while also too simultaneously having a circus arts career, which my circus arts career has not just been a decade long, it's been beyond that. And so having both of those coincide at the exact same time and making these different connections and experiencing enough of the industry, and working for every single company you can imagine. I have worked in every single type of show. There is literally not an environment, high or low, that I have not worked in as a circus performer, and I've worn a lot of hats. I've directed shows. I've been a producer. I've been an agent. I've been a choreographer, and I've worked in so many different hyper kind of performing arts spaces too that are not traditionally circus. And I've inserted myself in those environments as well. So having that kind of overlap into multidimensional or multidisciplinary environments has really informed me too. So I think that, coming from this robust background of not just an artist, but having a multitude and multifaceted experiences in the circus arts industry and working all over the world as well. Touring, doing resident shows, doing independent contracting, doing eventing, doing stunts, which I do also too in LA, being a part of SAG-AFTRA, just this combination of experiences has really informed all the advocacy that I've been doing really staunchly, I would say now for the past 5 years on behalf of the circus arts industry.
Well, it sounds like you are uniquely poised for this particular type of advocacy, since you really, as you say, you've been in kind of every arena possible, both literally and figuratively, I guess. So you say you started as a gymnast. How old were you when you started?
I was a little bit old, I like to say, when I started off as a gymnast. My friends were 2, 3, 4 years old, and I was 8 actually. So I wasn't super, super young. My first coach kind of discovered me when I was walking through a dance studio when I was a really little girl. I started off in dance, actually. I would have probably, been in ballet forever. I would have, I love Misty Copeland. So I always say I was the almost Misty. And, but my road kind of got intercepted by acrobatic gymnastics that way. I was super teeny tiny for my age. So that's why my coach thought at the time when he asked my parents if I wanted to join, he thought I was 4. That's how tiny I was at the time. Wow. Yeah, really small.
It's always so funny when people in circus and gymnastics, you ask them, hey, when did you start? And they say, oh gosh, I was so old. I was 8.
Yeah.
It's to the rest of us who, start our careers as adults, it's always a shocking number, but that's why I ask, because it is always interesting to see just how young people start, and that total perspective shift on what exactly is considered old. Now, along the same lines, and it's okay if you don't want to talk about this, but you mentioned you are a survivor of USA Gymnastics. For those who might not understand what you're insinuating, is that something you'd like to elaborate on?
Yes, it is, Kat, and thank you so much. And I'm very happy to explain that because this is something that I never wanted to go out of style. I don't want anyone to forget our journey. I was a part of one of the largest sexual abuse settlements in U.S. history. It took almost 10 years from start to finish. It took about 6 years of litigation and court cases and testifying and investigations for us to work the settlement out with USA Gymnastics and the USOPC, which is the Olympic Committee in America, for folks that aren't familiar with those terms and for those words. We were basically all victims of horrific sexual abuse perpetrated by a multitude of pedophiles within USA Gymnastics for decades and decades. These were folks that were operating as child abusers for, 20, 30 plus years in these really huge billion-dollar nonprofits that, kind of regulate and control, youth sports in America, amateur and Olympic sports within America, and specifically gymnastics. So most of the disciplines, I think, from USA Gymnastics were affected. Just to let folks know, it's not just artistic gymnastics that you see at the Olympics. That is a part or under the umbrella of USA Gymnastics. There's trampoline, there's tumbling, there's acrobatic gymnastics, there's rhythmic gymnastics. There's double mini. So there's, all of these different disciplines, and there's many survivors like myself that were affected by these abusers and these pedophiles that were left and allowed to operate for so many years, many of them unchecked, many of them known within the environments for many, many years. And, the FBI was sued by many survivors, and they just settled not that long ago. So that was another kind of a strain of our settlement process. of even the FBI being willing to cover up these crimes for these billion-dollar nonprofits and entities, so that they can continue to make money and make profit off of Olympians and off of, all of our gymnastics dreams and aspirations. So it was, it also, a part of this movement and a part of being a survivor of UC Gymnastics is the policy part. And so many of us are a part of advocating for increased regulations and reforms around the national governing bodies, which that includes USA Gymnastics, that includes USA Tennis, USA Taekwondo, USA Swimming, USA Equestrian, any kind of sport that you can imagine in America has basically fallen under this umbrella of national governing bodies. And so we've all been advocating for these last 10 years for a lot of bipartisan policy, which means that both sides of the aisle come to agreements on this type of legislation of increased protections and safety. And we're not done. I've been participating in amendments to policy around regulating these environments now for this many years. I just was participating with an office not that long ago in reviewing an amendment to the safe sport policy, which that was the initial policy that was introduced to kind of go in and police these environments, because most of them had zero regulation and we're doing most of their regulation in-house. And like I said, kind of selling, children up the river, just to save face and, get deals with NBC and, spaces like that so that they can make billions of dollars and put kids on Wheaties boxes, but not caring that they were suffering horrific abuse. So
it is such a horrendous situation, just absolutely horrifying. And the fact that the victims are the people who then had to take it into their own hands and shed light on the situation and come up with the solutions that you have, which again are, of course, a work in progress, right? But it's honestly inspiring to look at the group of you who have all said, no, we're not going to let this happen to any other generations of gymnasts and athletes. It's inspiring. It's horrible that it happened, and it's disgraceful, honestly. But it's also really beautiful to see all the work that's come out of that is doing so much good for the children of today and tomorrow, right? So I think there are many people who would thank you for that. Is this what has led you to this life of advocacy? Were you already involved in some circus representation, or was it this USA Gymnastics situation that actually pushed you to do everything that you're doing now?
That's a great question too. I was like everyone else, advocating behind the scenes and off the microphone within the circus industry, doing my due diligence in my own small life, in my own small, like, little career where something's not going right in your contract and you're trying to figure out how to protect yourself. You're joining forces with, the other individuals that you're working with, and, you're hearing a lot and you're trying to be resourceful. But really, the advocacy, yes, it did get informed by my being a survivor of UC Gymnastics and getting into the system in that way. And then also too, seeing so many of the similarities between the environments, I was like, wow, these environments are super similar. And it's interesting because most folks within the art space don't really like hearing that. And it's like, but it's so undeniable. I mean, existing within both, I'm like, I started to see so many similarities. I also started to see the fact that, so many of the same people that were in my environments from sport were naturally transitioning over into the circus and taking a lot of that mentality with them, taking a lot of that background, kind of education of how they existed in the sporting world, taking that bad education, mixed with wonderful and brilliant technique into the circus environment where they didn't ask enough questions, where they overly trusted the people that were in positions of power, where they were going into an environment that was also really super interesting and unique, and that a lot of people didn't really understand. So it helped you to feel a certain kind of way, where you felt overly informed, but you really had very little rights to what you were doing. And, I saw that and how concerning that was. And once I started to get empowered by the level of advocacy that I was doing for myself, which, reminding folks, when you get into the spaces of these type of big settlements, you have to learn and advocate a lot for yourself. You don't just have this legal counsel representing you that's just like telling you and teaching you all the time. And a lot of people think that you're just kind of sitting back and you're waiting to like sign something or to sign off on something. You really have to understand and know your rights, and you have to learn a lot about how the system works. And it goes in a lot of ways, and the system changes every single time you get into a new level of, settlements and, the next hearing you have, laws have gone into effect and changed. So it's a really interesting learning process through that. But I have to say that getting empowered through that and seeing all of the changes that we were also able to make really empowered me to start asking a lot more questions about how the circus industry is regulated and how it's run, and how we can shape it in an environment where I came from, where people said this environment will never change. They said that about USA Gymnastics for years, and I'm still hearing it. This environment will never change. I don't care what happens. Doesn't matter what anybody does. It's always going to be like this. It's beyond regulation. It's beyond anything. And hearing the same attitudes within the circus industry for years, it will always be this way. It's always going to be a challenge. It's always going to be so niche that it's, you can't possibly, bring any kind of policy to it or any kind of policy language. And I learned a lot from the advocates that were supporting us through this process, these brilliant people in these nonprofit spaces that were doing the good work, that had been fighting for years to try to get these policies passed. And it wasn't until this explosion of USA Gymnastics and all of these things came to be that the things that they had been working on for so many years actually finally found into place, because now people were coming to them like, what have you got? What are the answers that you guys have? Yes. And so they had a unique opportunity to finally insert their ideas that they have been like shouting from the rooftops about for years, but being shouted down by these really big, important entities that were like, we're going to take care of everything again on our own, and you have no business being here, and you're never going to get any policy passed that's going to regulate our industry, our communities, or our nonprofits, or whatever you want to call them. I call them industry, even though they are nonprofits technically, but they definitely don't function like that.
I have to say, I spent a few years in the circus industry myself as a stage manager, and the phrase, it is what it is, and you can't change it, and it's never going to change, is one of the most common things I think I ever heard when it came to some of the very things you're discussing. And I think you made a great point a moment ago about advocating for yourself, and the fact that advocacy is not necessarily these huge lawsuits, right? It starts with you, and it starts with the people around you. And it's very important to me as well, the things that you're talking about, in that whenever I speak up for myself, when it comes to, my rights, my pay, my conditions, these types of things that are all very important parts of workers' rights. I try to remind myself that when I advocate for me, I'm also advocating for all the people closest to me as well. And I wonder if you could tell our listeners, what is an example of something that you can advocate for yourself that may or may not be heard? It really depends on where you are. And sometimes it's more successful than other times. But can you give our listeners just some idea, some inspiration for something small in their own working conditions that they can speak up about?
I honestly think anything, Kat, to be honest, speaking up literally about anything, because you don't know what anyone else might need. You don't understand the ripple effects of those particular needs, of something that might come up for you that you feel is not a big deal. There's all sorts of things that could come out of that, that could turn into a chain of events that could affect those that are working in your environment for years to come. I honestly think, because I hear and I see so little of that within our industry, because people are so afraid to say anything about anything. When sometimes I am in environments where I'm like, that is such a small thing. Why don't you guys just say it? I mean, I'll give you an example of something that I dealt with in my most recent job. It was freezing where I was working.
Yeah.
Absolutely freezing, right? And it was cold in there. And it was so difficult for the performers to consistently just say, we are so cold. We all get sick just by coming in here to perform. We need better heating. We need base heaters. We need way more than what you're providing here. And it never fully changed. It never fully changed the whole time that I was working there. And it was a conversation that everyone had every single working day when we were inside of this working space and condition, right? And it seems like it's so small. It seems like it's a very small thing.
Oh, but it's not.
It's not. You know, performers were wearing very little clothing most of the time, or we're wearing very light materials. And our muscles need to be warm for us to be able to perform our job, which is dangerous. Now, these are all very common sense things for everybody listening. For anyone that's not even in the industry, whenever I would bring it up, whenever another performer or worker would bring it up, people would be like, but that's like a no-brainer. They have to figure out a way to insulate you guys. I mean, how are you going to work? People are getting sick. You're not feeling well. Like, you know, that should just be a basic right that you should have. And so in showing that, you know, I'm not saying that no one said anything, but the amount of fear that was associated around bringing that up consistently. And the fact that, you know, I would say, you know, things like, well, I guess if we didn't all show up today to do the job because everybody was just too cold, I wonder how quickly things would change.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody was willing to do that. No one was willing people would say, oh, it's just being cold. But it was such a big deal from a small thing, but it wasn't a small thing. But no one, you know, the idea of just standing down for a day and the potential of what that would cost all of us was, again, it was too profound to bear, right? We had so much power in the fact that it wasn't a very big cast. It was pretty small. And we could have shut the show down for one day. But, you know, what did people think about that? Well, the ripple effect. What about if they go out of business? Or what about if we all lose our jobs? What about if I lose my rights to my insurance that I just barely got after working here for almost 3 years, even though I should have had that from the beginning? You know, any of those things, right? That you start thinking about in terms of how that could help. So whatever it might be, I would implore a circus worker to speak up about it and, you know, take that risk. And you never know what that risk could be, unfortunately, in our environment. You might lose your job. You might say, hey, we can't perform in this space. Like, it's not right. We can't warm up in this space. It's not great. It's not adequate. It's inadequate. And you might lose your job just for saying that, even though you're right.
And now a note from our sponsor. The StageLync podcast is proud to be sponsored by ClearComm. ClearComm is the leader in voice communications for theatre and the performing arts. Call your cues with the simplicity and elegance of ClearComm Intercom solutions. You can find them at clearcom.com. Go check them out.
That fear is real. That fear is real. And I think that especially what I've noticed post-COVID is there's such an appreciation to have work that some people who might normally have spoken up, I've noticed are actually holding back quite a bit because they are afraid of that, because they are grateful to have this job and they're afraid of not being asked back, not having their contract renewed. But then it just brings us right back to this idea of small level advocacy, because it's really easy to minimize something like, oh, the performers are saying they're cold. Like let's say you have, for example, an artist who's reporting that to, for example, a stage manager or their coach or their artistic director. It could stop there. If that person says, oh, they're just being dramatic, it's a little cold, they'll be fine, then the issue stops there. It doesn't get solved. And then maybe that artist ends up snapping a muscle because they can't warm up properly. But if you have a stage manager, a coach, an artistic director, people who listen to that and say, oh, tell me more, tell me about your concern. Is this something that lots of people are feeling? Okay, we're all feeling like it's too cold to warm up. Let's do something about this. That is small level advocacy as well. There's speaking up, but there's also listening. And it's so important that in order to solve problems like that, and to our listeners, maybe that doesn't sound like such a big deal, but to a circus artist, to an athlete, that is a huge deal. And I'll tell you, my team and I had a show canceled because it was too cold. We had lost power. We couldn't get the tent heated up again, and we had to cancel a show. People were not happy, but you know what? We still had circus artists for the rest of our shows. So, if you ask me, that's a win at the end of the night. So I hear and I appreciate what you're saying. And I think I would urge people along with you to both raise the concern and also listen to the concern if you are in a position to continue advocating for those people. Thank you very much for that. So I'd love to get a little bit more into the nitty gritty about what you've been speaking to the U.S. government about. Can you talk to us about what exactly are your goals? What have these conversations been like? Are you facing traction? What kind of traction are you getting? Just tell us all about it.
It has been quite something. It's a lot of work. It's challenging. It's challenging to put a conversation like the circus arts industry into a space of labor rights, of workers' rights, of unionizing rights, of legislation and of policy. These are conversations that we're most oftentimes left out of. And I've been banging on every single door that I can find, some that I've been able to get through due to my previous advocacy work, which has been fantastic. If you have a door that's familiar to you, use it, because they're at least familiar with you and they're much more willing to, to listen to, the other kind of difficulties that you may be having or other ideas that you might be having. So that's also been a really fantastic space to have. But that's just getting you in the door. After that, you have to have something to say. And for too long, the circus industry, I think, has decided that we don't have anything to say in Washington, D.C., that we're too okay with allowing, other folks to get in there and speak on our behalf or to minimize our concerns, which we were just speaking about, right? Of the small level of advocacy, the things that we think are small that are actually not small. They're the most important things that are crucial to keeping our business running and creating this environment where we don't feel so disposable, due to the difficulties that we may express or have in relationship to other industries. But putting ourselves within Washington, D.C. and saying, hey, we have the same labor rights and workers' issues as any other industry. We're just as vital and viable. We have the same needs. We have the same ask. We want paid leave. We would like unemployment. We want access to disability insurance. We would like to have adequate health insurance. We don't want to be retaliated against in the workplace. We also want equal pay. These are conversations that people and folks, and especially those within DC or on a local level, any type of policy person or representative doesn't normally connect with the circus arts industry. And so that has been a part of my own personal fight in educating DC and then also too in educating the industry of, these are the buzzwords that you have every right to use for the basis of who you are. You have every right to say, I don't want to be misclassified as an independent contractor if I do have rights as an employee. Or I would like to stay as an independent contractor, but I know that I'm not getting my full needs met here. And why is that? Why is that I'm having such a hard time as an independent contractor? Why don't I know the rules and laws and regulations that are maybe on the docket that could help me to exist as an independent contractor better in the circus arts? Why is there arts policy out there that actually does not fully respect the rights of the circus arts industry, even though it's an arts policy? Where is the disconnect there, which we find a lot in a lot of art spaces? A lot of my work is not only just being in DC and speaking to those in DC and legislators and lawmakers, it's also been speaking a lot to the arts advocacy communities that have mostly left us out of all of these conversations, and are not advocating uniquely and individually for the circus arts industry. And being able to say that, being able to bring up these very difficult conversations in spaces where people feel like, well, we're doing the work. It's like, well, you're doing the work, but we're being left out. We don't have a box to check. And that's an issue for me. Why doesn't the circus arts industry have a box to check most of the time? Why is it that you're usually piggybacking on another art form to be able to get a grant or to be able to get a loan or to be able to apply for literally anything out there when it comes to government? Again, why is it that the portals are so challenging for us in this industry? And I can use my experience as well as thousands of other circus workers that I have known for decades who share these same experiences. Like, it's not just like, oh, it's just my experience. It's maybe challenging or bad or hard. I've also had a really robust and great and wonderful career at the exact same time, right? I try to communicate that as well. We're not here just saying like, oh, we're having all these problems and, we basically don't have careers. Like we have success. We have one percenters in our industry. We have people that have had years and years and, have had wonderful careers. But again, where are their pensions? Where are their retirements? Why don't we have access to things like that in our environments? Why is it that our industry is so overtly privatized that most folks don't know their basic rights? They don't know their basic fundamental rights in our industry. They also don't know what rights are, being kept from them. What things are not being enforced on a day-to-day basis. And, then also too, what assistance they might take or go and seek out if something is happening to them. And this is about whatever position you might be within the circus arts industry. I mean, that's why I say circus worker. I don't only speak about, the circus performer, because to me, this is a very multifaceted perspective. So the conversations I've been having in DC are in and around policy and legislation and how we might get to that point for our industry in the way that so many other niche environments are doing. For example, the modeling industry. The modeling industry has made enormous gains in terms of policy. I mean, what they're doing in New York is sensational. The governor of New York is about to sign off, on a great bill for the modeling industry, where they're infusing them, mostly independent contractors, with all of these rights, where they can't be taken advantage of by their agencies and, where they can't be forced to work certain type of hours and things of that nature. And so, in communicating with so many different unions and so many different advocacy spaces, I'm like, and why can't the circus arts industry get this? Like, why isn't there a circus arts minimum wage? Why don't we have a basic salary that you can't go below? Why is it that these, different environments that are not circus specific, why don't they have harsher, regulations placed on them where they can't just force you to do your job on anything that they put inside of their company or anything inside of their building? Why don't you have better rigging rights? Why is it that the majority of any environment that has union rights in it, the least of them that has rights is the circus worker in that environment? I mean, it's really quite something and profound to see that within so many different spaces of circus arts. Why is it that, we don't have any regulations around, so much, non-pay within the industry with respect to all of the Got Talents, where there's all of these exchanges where performers are just, expected to make, $0, while these companies, profit billions of dollars off of them. Now, folks might think, oh, that's just the way again. It is. I say no. Why isn't there
buy groceries with exposure?
Yeah, exactly. You can't buy, and I was giving this example the other day, Kat, to someone when we were discussing this, because this comes up so much. I always like to say, I know that not everybody makes $0 off of all of the Got Talent, because I've gotten paid by several Got Talents. If you haven't seen me on a Got Talent, it's because they didn't pay me what I wanted, because I feel like we have the right to get paid and not even what they are paying us either, right? But I was giving an example, in terms of, the whole exposure exchange, because people are saying like, oh, well, like actors have the exact same thing when they go on like Jimmy Kimmel or they go on the Tonight Show. I said, yeah, Jimmy Kimmel, all of his actors, Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks, they get paid $600 when they go on Jimmy Kimmel, right? That's like the SAG standard rate. However, they're making $50 million off of the movie that they're promoting on Jimmy Kimmel. It's not the same thing in the circus industry. You're not going on AGT for free to promote a show that you're making $5 million or $10 million.
Exactly.
You're literally just not making any money. So these are the conversations that we're having, because it's important to bring up all of these different layers of the industry and where we can potentially approach them through state and local and federal policy, because all of those things are different. Where can things maybe be targeted with a city ordinance? There's city ordinances where you can establish a certain level of pay within that city for a circus worker or a circus artist, where you cannot pay them less than that. That, at this point, we don't have in so many, robust kind of circus cities. And we don't have anyone in DC lobbying for our industry. I want to remind everyone that as well that's listening in. There is no one in there, other than a few of us folks the last few years who have taken it upon ourselves to go in and have these discussions with these lawmakers and legislators, even the ones that, are profoundly interested in supporting the arts. We start bringing up circus and they're like, oh, we have no idea what goes on in your guys' industry. I mean, it's a congressman, it's a congresswoman, it's people that are on the arts councils in DC that create all of these regulations and bills and all these things that sign off on all this stuff. And they're like, we have no idea. Oh, that's interesting. Wow. Oh, we had no idea that, your industry, was lacking all of these essential rights, or that the majority of the industry doesn't have union access or is not a part of the union. Most of these environments, in the political landscape just do not have that information about us. And if there is any kind of circus know-how, it's usually by the bigger entity companies that are lobbying for their own gain, which is that's what companies do. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a terrible thing. That's not calling anyone out, but that's usually the kind of response that you'll hear back when you go into these spaces and you're advocating for things to be more equitable and to maybe get a bigger seat at the table. So for me, I have been advocating, for example, for circus arts recognition by the National Endowment for the Arts. With an individual category. That is something that I think is just shocking that we do not have in America. Circus arts representation is something that exists in so many different countries across the world, and something that you would automatically assume we have here. But for some reason, they've decided that we fit better in this category of art forms where they put you in where they don't know what to do with you. And I think that's wrong. I don't think that that's fair to one of the most historically popular art forms that has evolved over, decades and hundreds of years. That to me is like the most popular art form out there. Try me if you want to challenge me on that. We are literally everywhere, and we're in everything. And so that would help a whole host of things to be able to have that type of recognition. For folks that are unfamiliar about recognition, most countries are getting recognition by UNESCO. Unfortunately, with the way that the laws and legislation are designed, we did not join UNESCO in the capacity where it allows us to do that. So that's why we can only seek recognition on a national level through the National Endowment for the Arts, which controls so much of arts grants and funding, and not just on like this very highbrow level that most folks think about. Any kind of arts council is going to be seeking funding or grants from the National Endowment for the Arts that'll trickle down. And then those that are not a nonprofit, for example, can apply for those grants and get access to that money. So that if you are a small business or a circus worker or anything like that, you can have access to those funds, even if you are not individually a nonprofit entity, right? So it's about more than that. And then again, it's about having that stamp of approval by the NEA that we, at this point in time, do not have. So we get access to so much less from their space. And that causes a lot of problems and difficulties for our art form, which we have, really investigated over the past 5 years and come to the conclusion that that would be a really great accomplishment for the industry. It would solve a lot of problems. And then it could serve as a really brilliant umbrella to a whole host of other legislation and policy that we could potentially succeed in getting, like what I was discussing before. One of those would potentially be a safe art or a safe circus, which would be in addition to safe sport, which I was speaking about previously, which governs and polices all the national governing bodies of sport, amateur and Olympic sports, right? So they're the ones that go in and say, hey, you're not regulating your environment as well. We need to file a report. This would also be in with respect to OSHA and, all those other type of regulatory bodies that already exist. This would be an additional branch of that to, regulate the environments more and to give some assistance and some more help. And we had the CEO of Safe Sport at our White House meeting, which was phenomenal. And we've been working with Safe Sport now for the past few years and seeing how that could potentially work, because Safe Sport is getting so many offers, or so many complaints actually from the performing arts world, that are asking for assistance. And they're like, we get all of these complaints that we don't know what to do with. Like, what do we do with these complaints that can't go through the EEOC, that can't go through OSHA? Can't go to the labor board. Like, where do these complaints go? And there's so many niche environments that are from the art world, like the circus arts, that are coming to them asking for help. And so my idea was, well, the creation, I think, of a safe art or a safe circus could be something that really promotes that increased regulation from our brains, from how our industries work, from folks within our industry that could help to source that and run that, so that we don't continue to hand over that regulation to entities that are actually not specifically from the circus arts industry, which is basically how they're majority run right now.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic idea. And, I'll say now something that I've been saying for years. It is incredibly easy to take advantage of people who love what they do. And when you don't have the representation or the regulation to actually advocate for those people, then we end up in a situation that we're in right now. So you're truly doing wonderful work. And I'm sure that the whole industry is very grateful for what you're doing. Have you, because we just talked about kind of a regulatory body, do you see any potential for a circus union?
Yes. And that was the other thing that I wanted to go into. And you're so brilliant, Kat. Thank you for continuing to, guide the conversation so great. Yes, a union. Because most of the time when I'm saying all these things and it's exhaustive and I'm talking for like an hour, what the small feedback I get from most of the folks in DC, they're like, you know what you're talking about? And I'm like, yeah, I know. They're like, you're talking about a union.
A union. Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I know. And so the thing is, though, with our industry, and why I try to provide some things like, for example, a Circus Arts Rights Act, is because we may never be able to achieve a union status. We may never be able to do that. We are a huge population of independent contractors, which does not mean that we cannot form a union, by the way. It does not mean that we don't have rights to form a union or to be absorbed by another union.
Yes.
Organize, which I want folks to remember, that we don't have the exact same rights as those that would be employees to organize, but we do have rights to organize as a union. We would just have various rights that are slightly different. But that's definitively what we need. And then if we cannot organize a union or pockets of unions, which I have also seen, could go with Actors Equity, for example. Some could go with AGVA NY. Some with AGMA. They can host a campaign or an election for a certain select few of a circus company. You only need 30%, y'all, to turn in your union cards to start that union process. And there's so many unions out there that would love to host a union election for a circ show or for a circus show. So if we're not able to fully get that, which that is something also too that I continue to advocate for, and I want folks to really, someone to take the lead on that in the way, in the way that we've never seen before, because that definitely needs to happen. But if we cannot do that, then we also need that legislation that can support all of the fundamental rights that I've been speaking about throughout this podcast, that would come through a union. But that, for example, like I said, the Model Alliance, they see, okay, we might not be able to get the union status in the way that we want. So let's go for legislation and policy that puts all of those rights inside of a bill, so that it doesn't say you have to be a part of a union to be able to get these rights in New York City, for example. And these are models that are based there, but then are working all over the world, just to let everybody know. It's not just exclusively, they're all repped in New York. And, and again, people will say there's so many complexities within the circus arts. I said, well, again, so many of these unions are taking on really unique elections. Medieval Times just did a union election. The Disney mascots are in the union process. Drunk Shakespeare, which is a cool theater company and group that is now all over the United States, just won their union election, is going into negotiations. So listen to all of these very unique type of spaces. And I don't even need to continue to bring up SAG after for all of you who keep saying our environment is way too unique and diverse to have like union representation. We do have the ability to have that. And especially a space that we can put all of these different desires and needs into a container to be able to hold them inside of, which would be so important for us to be able to do, because it is complex narrative, but it's not so complex that we can't find a way to agree on certain things. And it's not like we would all agree on anything anyway. That's not how it works. Realistic. And that's not what I'm advocating for. So the reality of that is that, you'll be able to compromise on some things, and other things, we'll just have to evolve one step at a time, and nothing is ever set in stone in any type of process like this. So it's something that would be definitely an evolution. And I definitely look forward to the day that even if we don't get absorbed and do things from other unions, independent circus arts union of itself can spring up. That's also a possibility. That's a reality. We can do that. We can come together and facilitate that on our own independently as well, which I think that could be a brilliant source of progressive activity for the circus arts industry, and something that is very much needed from all of the issues that I see that we have.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you said earlier in our conversation about how the things that circus workers want are just the same things that anybody who goes to work every day wants. And I think the problem is it's such a mystery, this industry, to the people who haven't seen it with their own eyes. It's like, it's this totally unique and different corner of the world that people just can't even begin to touch or understand. And it's funny, you say, we use it in conversation, like, oh, it's the circus, you're going to run away with the circus is like the craziest thing you can say you're going to do. Right. And to so many people, I think it's just this untouchable concept, when in reality, it's a group of people who are all showing up to work the same as any office worker, the same as any, and if we can provide these rights for athletes, for theater artists, for TV and film professionals, like it's all the same. Like, our costumes might be a little bit brighter. We might do a little bit wackier stuff than you do at work, but we still, at the end of the day, as you say, we're all human beings who deserve the same rights and the same amount of consideration from our employers. And so I've said this a million times, but I think what you're doing, the work you're doing is incredibly important and impactful. And my question to you now is, what's next?
What's next? Well, the journey continues. There were a few other facets of the conversation that we had at the White House that I did want to bring up in terms of circus arts in education, for example. We don't have circus arts education. You can't necessarily go to college and get a 3-year or 4-year degree in these circus arts. And that's something as well that we are pushing for and fighting for, which could also to solve a whole host of problems and issues for how our industry is seen. So many times people say, oh, well, academics isn't for everyone. So then why don't you just go to the circus? We're like always belittled. Like, this isn't like an extremely highly technical, like brilliant, multi-generation.
As if it isn't one of the hardest things a human being could do.
Risking your life every single day, which we know, right? We know people risking their lives every single day, like these other industries that, are able to get this higher learning and higher education. That's something else that we should have. That's something else that we are pushing for and that we should all continue to push for. And not just like a graduate degree program, not just about getting your PhD in circus arts history. You should be able to say that if you've completed 4 years for Cirque du Soleil, that you have a basic degree. You have a basic degree. And so, we spoke to the White House intently about that. And again, it's not about maybe getting everything that we're asking for. It's about getting one of those things, right? And being happy, right? One of those things could potentially lead us into all of the other things, right? You have to start somewhere. And so that's what I'm also trying to show the industry very, very importantly and intently, is that we focus on one of those things, and it can be a ripple or domino effect of us being able to get a whole host of other legislation and protections and guidances, and not just about people feeling like you're trying to regulate our industry like something is wrong with it. It's like, it's also about giving our industry the rights that it deserves to have. You should be able to have all of this knowledge. You should be able to have a 20 or 30-year degree and basically say, and go and do another job that's outside of being in the circus or within the circus, and come to them and be able to apply on Indeed or on any kind of site. And if they ask, oh, do you have a 3-year degree, a 4-year degree? You can check off that box very easily. Why isn't that so? Why isn't it, circus arts, in education? We know that it promotes so many different facets in children, that it could be, a really brilliant source of education and learning for children in schools. So, it could, offer so many mental health benefits, getting kids off their screens. Again, we all know how beneficial it is to have these programs. So many of us have benefited from them throughout our entire lives. So that's another facet. And then going back again I just wanted to go a little bit deeper into the safety and regulation of this in terms of like health and circus arts injuries and circus arts medicine, and getting more adequate care and, and adequate access to the things that you need, where it's just, again, doesn't just exist as kind of like this theory of what are you kind of talking about when you're talking about in terms of health, safety, and regulation. We are a specific industry that has specific needs, and we should have access to healthcare and have access to insurances, to disability, to workman's comp, all of those things that are specific to our needs, and language that is inclusive, that is circus centric, that includes those particular and specific needs, for circus individuals, for circus companies, that are existing, that are trying to be small businesses, that are trying to get their circus studios or their circus schools or their circus programs insured and cannot do so. These are all of those things that could potentially be underneath that umbrella. And these are things and conversations that I've been having with the White House now for over a year, and in conversation with legislators and lawmakers now for about 5 years. I can't believe that it's been that long. And so where do we go next? We continue to expand on these conversations. We got I think, a brilliant stamp of approval by finally getting through the door and sitting down in conversation with the White House and with the Department of Labor, and how essential that was, and the folks that they invited to that table to actually be in discussion with us. Because even when I was creating this particular roundtable discussion, I fought hard for it to not just be a show, for us to not just be invited there to perform and put on a circus show, or this just to not sit back and speak about only the experiences on a personal level of what it's like to be in this business. I wanted it to be about so much more. I wanted it to be about change. I wanted us to be a part of those conversations that they're having in DC, that, we're, a part of the most pro-union administration that's ever existed, and wanting a seat at that table. When you have an administration, you have an environment that is speaking your language. I mean, you want to run through that door. You want to
Yes.
get a seat at that table. You want those folks. You want to be on their minds. And you want those connections, and you want to see how those connections can continue to grow and build. And nurturing those connections over the past year and a half is what I've been doing. And that is the reason why we were able to finally, have that opportunity, and experience, with the White House, just a couple of weeks ago, to change how they relate to us, so that they're thinking about us when they are going towards policy, so that they're going to continue to bring us into the room, which is what we have needed and what we will continue to need, because these are not things that happen overnight. I want to remind the industry of this. I want to remind everybody of this. I am having conversations weekly to be able to keep folks in conversation with us and continue to expand on these important policy points, and to see who wants to support us the strongest. Again, a lot of this is very bipartisan, so you want everybody on both sides on your side. And so what do we do next? We continue to advocate. We continue to educate ourselves. We continue to connect with one another and to reach out, as an industry to advocate on small levels and then as well on big levels. I have said this for 5 years. Please reach out to the White House, reach out to your president, reach out to your local senator, your governor, your mayor, your city council member that's on the arts board. Reach out to your school board, reach out to everybody, anybody that you can, and discuss and talk to them about these particular points, because it is about being the loudest person in the room. It is about staying in the game and staying around folks and keeping them in your orbit and staying in their orbit to be able to get the policy that you desire passed. I mean, we have to see how this election goes as well. You know, we are in a sweet spot where this administration has been very open to us, and is very open to us. And, you know, we have some other things that are in development right now that, you know, I'm looking forward to, but a lot rests right now on the administration and where the election goes. I would encourage folks right now to vote, in the meantime, because that is one of the most important things that you can do. And I'd also say to vote in your interest. I've been saying that now for several years. If you have folks that are in positions of power that are advocating for your interests, it would be in your best interest to continue to make sure that they stay in office or that they get elected if they're running on your interest. Not to say that DC is perfect or that politics are perfect and that, you know, maybe they don't absorb or speak to all of your needs. But I do think that it's oftentimes strange, you know, when I see folks speaking about representatives and I'm like, but what are they about? Do they support any of your basic fundamental needs with respect to your career that affects so much of your life? What policies are they for? What policies are they supporting? And, you know, I speak to this so much on my Circuspreneur podcast. So I would highly recommend that folks tune into my podcast where I speak about this as intently and as much as I possibly can. And I share, you know, what different ideas we're moving forward with, what ideas are on the docket, how different meetings went with which representatives in which state, in which city, because I'm speaking to all of them. And, you know, taking ideas, you know, from the industry constantly about what is important to them and what are they facing and what is most timely. Another thing that I did want to point out before we finish up, Kat, as well, is the need for more data and circus industry data. And that is another big thing that we brought up during that discussion, and something that I hope that we get a better, I think, a better move on in this industry. There's such a lack of data in the circus arts industry on all levels. And I know a lot of folks are really intent on getting a lot of data on how performers move and how they heal and all of those things, which is very essential. But, you know, the other data that we very much need is, you know, how many folks were unemployed for how long this year? How many folks got laid off? You know, like, you know, this last, you know, I've been living and working in Vegas now for the past few years. And just to give an example, like almost 4 or 5 shows closed at the exact same time, and thousands of people lost their jobs in Las Vegas in the span of just like a few months, you know. And we were even having that discussion as well of where is the data on that? Where is the data of how many folks lost their jobs? How long is it going to take for them to get back into a job? How long is it going to take for them to get back into a resident show? How long is it going to take for them to get off unemployment? How long is it going to take for them to get back into a job where they have health insurance? Did they lose their health insurance when they lost that job? Did they even have insurance when they had that job? Do they have adequate health insurance until they get another job? Do they have enough money to promote themselves to get the next job? You know, these are data points that we just don't have enough of. And
are they going to have to relocate now because there are now fewer shows to work on in Vegas? And it's a very specific skill set. Yeah, these are huge questions that would be amazing to have numbers for.
Yes. And that comes up so often in discussions and in meetings. And so, you know, I implore, you know, circus industry folks, if they have data, if they have surveys, send them to me completed. Send them to me. If you've done some, send them to me because then I can use them in industry meetings. I do all the time. Email me, message me, DM me on social media at Shenea Stiletto, at the Circuspreneur Podcast, and also to reach out to me if you want assistance in a meeting with your local representative. I can sit on that meeting with you. I can contact that representative for you. and do the work that it takes to get into that meeting, which sometimes it takes us up to 6 months to have one meeting. I would implore you as well, if I reach out to you and ask you to join a meeting, please respond back and go to the meeting. Don't be so intimidated. Say, I don't have anything to say, Shenea. How could I possibly meet with my representative, with my congressman, with my congresswoman, with my governor, with my senator? You have so much to say, and don't worry, I'll do the rest. But the importance of all of us calling and reaching out and doing our part on an individual and local level. It's these small things that people think are not important are so important. And I can tell you, as someone who has gotten policy passed, who has worked on policy for years, you don't need this huge spotlight. You don't need a catastrophe in your industry either to get policy passed. That's not what this is about. You don't need this horrific lawsuit or settlement like we were discussing, Kat, to be able to get policy passed or to get Washington, D.C. to listen to you. But you do need to have something in a container which speaks the language of DC, which speaks policy, which speaks legislation. And we've worked very hard to define these tangible pieces of policy that Washington, D.C. is really responding to. And if they weren't responding to it, we wouldn't have been invited to the White House. So I want to remind folks that our change.org campaign and petition has everything that I spoke about in this podcast today inside of that petition. So if things didn't make super sense to you today when I was speaking to you about them, or I went into too much story, we do it very factually and we lay it all out in the petition so that it's easily absorbable and so that you can consume that. And all you have to do is sign it and share it so that we can get thousands and thousands of signatures in petitioning support for Congress, support for the NEA via congressional funds, which would give the NEA the potential and the ability to create that individualized category for the circus arts industry, which we are hoping doesn't just rest on that. We're hoping to bypass the need for anything like that, that they can just do that without requiring the extra funds, that they can just set aside those funds and start that individual category just kind of right now because we're so special and amazing and so great. So I know that was a big mouthful, Kat, and I really appreciate you giving me the space and the time to, discuss and talk about, what really happened not so long ago, which was a historic listening session with the White House and a position and a seat at the table that the circus arts industry has long deserved. And it wasn't going to stop until I hopefully got us there. And I hope by way of this administration that we can continue this conversation, because if we don't, I have a lot of work to do in trying to seat at the table for the next administration, and hopefully the contacts and connections that I've been having, that I've been making in tandem with other folks that I've been advocating with that have been doing great work. Hopefully we have strengthened those connections over the 5 years that would help us go into a different administration, which is the reality of politics and sometimes how things go. But I want this industry to not be afraid of politics. And if you don't do politics, politics will do you. I've heard that from some brilliant advocates over the years, and it's like, oh my God, it's so good. It shapes every single facet of your life and of your career. And no matter what you say about your career, any decision that's being made is affected by something that happened on a political level, whether it's federal, state, or local. And if politics feels intimidating to you, contact me. I can put you in touch with some great spaces. There's a really great nonprofit called She Should Run. It's a really great space to learn about politics in a very kind of non-intimidating way. I really implore folks to do their work in understanding also too what type of policy could affect your life. And if you're curious about that, again, just contact me and we can have a conversation about anything that you need to know. I'm here for the industry. I do as much as I can. I can't do everything. And that's the responsibility of the rest of the industry to advocate for itself and continue to push us forward and talk a big game and expand in this conversation, because we have the ability to speak in the way that other industries do that are making so many gains. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Your industry is just as important as any other industry. And you're not so unique and out there that you can't possibly have just fundamental working rights, like Kat said beautifully earlier. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the moment we finish recording here, I will be going to change.org/circus arts recognition, signing and sharing. And I hope that all of our listeners will as well. And Shenea, I can't wait to see what the circus arts industry looks like 10 years from now after all of the hard work that you've put in. We do end the podcast with the same 2 questions every day, which are the following. Number 1, what is your favorite part about the circus industry and why?
Oh, that's a really good question. Oh my gosh. I would say my favorite part about the circus arts industry is meeting and having friends from all over the world and living all over the world and having instant friends and family, no matter where I am in the world. All you have to do is say that you're in the circus and you instantly have friends and family. And I've never felt more loved, I think, in a space, and I've felt immediate camaraderie and connection with folks in the circus arts industry in any country you can imagine that I've been in the world. It's very special.
Oh, that's so true. I agree completely. And then our final question, and I know we've discussed many ways to improve the industry. However, if you could change just one thing about the circus industry, what would it be?
I would say the culture and the mindset in thinking that we don't deserve labor or workers' right. And the idea that I would say the groupthink in terms of we are an othered industry and that we exist outside of a spectrum that could be served well with more labor and more workers' rights and more union rights. And that we are just too hyper unique and hyper functioning and too out there to be regulated in a way that could equitably work for all folks in the industry on any level that they serve in this industry. So I think the culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shenea. I can't wait to see the continued progress that you make. And please keep in touch with us and let us know how it's all going.
Thank you so much, Kat. I'm so grateful to be here on the StageLync podcast. I'm so grateful to represent the Circus Arts Guild of America. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the continued gains that we're going to make. And folks, stay tuned with our developments in and around working with the White House. More to come.
Thanks, Shenea.
Thank you for listening to the StageLync podcast. StageLync is an online platform that gives you access and connection to the live performing arts. As a guest, you can read about live performing arts from across the globe and gain insights from performers and artists on stage and all the amazing people who work behind the curtain. If you are an industry professional, StageLync Pro offers jobs, networks, and career support tools, and you can build your own professional profile on the site. As a StageLync podcast listener, you are eligible for 20% off your StageLync Pro membership. Visit us at stagelync.com and when joining, use the code SLPodcast. StageLync, that's Stagelync.com.